The Battle of Trenton. The Battle of Trenton occurs December 27th, 1776. Now, this is obviously after the Battle of Bunker Hill. In 1775, America had done quite well at the beginning of the war. They had won the Battle of Lexington and Concord. They had a moral victory in the Battle of Bunker Hill. But after the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Patriots really had a bad year for the rest of 1775 and pretty much the whole year of 1776 up to this point at the very end of the year in 1776. They had lost many engagements. The leaders of the Continental Congress were really questioning the leadership of George Washington, and they were actually thinking about replacing him with someone else. Now, other than politicians, Washington had another problem. His other problem was many of his soldiers in his army, their enlistments were running out at the end of the year. So in January 31st of 1776, many of those soldiers' enlistments would be up and they were free to go. And he did not believe, the way the year went in 1776, that those soldiers would actually re-enlist. So at the end of the year, he was going to lose a large portion of his army, and he had struggled to win any battles in 1776, and politically it looked like he was going to get replaced the next year. So he had to make a bold move, and his bold move is here in the Battle of Trenton. Now, understanding warfare during this time, during the winter time, usually armies would make some kind of winter encampment, and they would basically hunker down for the winter time, and there would be no fighting during the winter. Typically, armies went home around harvest time, harvest their crops, came back in the spring after they planted their fields, and fought a war basically throughout the summer, and then took a break. So obviously a lot different than what battles are today, but that's how it was. Now the Patriots are in winter encampment here in Pennsylvania, which obviously Pennsylvania borders New Jersey, where this group of Hessian soldiers are located. You'll see over here on the map where the Hessians in red are here in Trenton, New Jersey, and you can see just over here in Pennsylvania, just outside the map, where Washington makes his encampment. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the Hessian army that's here in Trenton, New Jersey. The Hessians are what many historians call mercenaries. Now, the problem with calling Hessians mercenaries is typically mercenaries are a single individual who's paid by a foreign country to come and fight. The problem here, the Hessians are not individuals. They're a whole unit, they're a whole army from what we would consider today Germany. Germany back then was made up of kind of like city-states. They weren't a unified country yet, but they are what we would think of as German people. These Hessians, or Germans, were being paid by Great Britain, so they were what we would call an auxiliary army, not necessarily mercenaries. But many historians refer to them as a mercenary group. And this is actually pointed out in the Declaration of Independence when Jefferson said hordes of mercenaries are being transported at this time. He was referring to the Hessians. Now, a little bit about the Hessians. The Hessians are extremely well-trained group of individuals. There's a really good link to a podcast that talks about the Hessians, which I will post in your class folders. If you have some extra time, I highly recommend that you listen to it. It also talks about the Battle of Trenton and some of the misconceptions of today. All right, so these Hessians are Germans who are well trained. Now, Britain really questioned whether or not to use these Hessian mercenaries or auxiliary army because so many of the colonists themselves had actually come from Germany. There were so many German-speaking people here in the colonies. They were actually worried that these Hessians would come over and wouldn't fight because there were so many German citizens living here in the colonies. And actually, in the end, many Hessian soldiers actually stayed behind. They deserted the army, and they actually made a life here in the colonies. All right, so that's enough about the Hessians. The Hessians are extremely well trained, so understand that they're well trained, they're well armed. Okay, they're professional soldiers. Now, a lot of their tactics proved to not work here in North America, especially fighting a ragtag group of the Patriot Army in their guerrilla warfare. All right, so Washington is desperate for a victory. He needs a victory to pull up the morale of his men, but also regain confidence in the politicians who put him in charge of the army. So what his great plan is to cross the Delaware River and march into Trenton and do a sneak attack. So you can see here's where Washington makes his famous crossing across the Delaware River. Everybody probably, I'm sure, recognizes the famous picture of Washington crossing the Delaware River. Now, the picture itself is misleading. The Patriot Army crossed in the dead of night. Remember, this is a sneak attack. They're not crossing in the middle of the day, which this picture might suggest. They're crossing in the middle of the night. Conditions were extreme. Now, I know the picture shows the ice flow here in the river to look like icebergs. The river was partially frozen, but probably not to this extent. And you see the people in the picture, all nicely dressed, almost look like posing. This wasn't the case. That night was extreme weather, horrible wind. It rained. They had experienced sleet and blowing snow. These were horrible conditions for Washington, and it actually slowed his pace so much of transporting his large group of men, 2,400 men that he is trying to get across this river, actually more than that, in time to surprise the Hessians in Trenton, New Jersey before the sun came up. So that's the game plan here, is to cross the Delaware River, march to Trenton, and surprise them before daybreak. So Washington does cross the Delaware River in the middle of the night on Christmas Day. However, because of the conditions, because of the number of men that he had to transport, they failed to do it in the time frame that Washington wanted. So they were not going to get to Trenton before daybreak. So this sneak attack was really coming unraveled. All right, so we're going to stop there for the first part of the Battle of Trenton, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about what happens after Washington and his men get across the Delaware River. So again, as always, if you have questions, rewatch the video, and then if you still have questions, make sure that you come and ask.